Let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all for attending this new webinar tonight. My name is Lisa Klein. I am on the Ag and Natural Resources team at UGA Extension in Gwinnett County, Georgia. If you are here from out of state, great. We're happy to have you. If you are here from anywhere in the state of Georgia, thank you for attending. This is open to anybody. It's free. If you know anybody that likes to learn, this is a great way to learn. I have the In the Garden webinar series, which is what this is part of, and it could be anything. We've talked about, we'll be talking about weird insects. We've talked about tomatoes. We talk about soil. We talk about pretty much anything and everything that you could possibly think of. Sometimes they're new. Sometimes I bring back some oldie and goodies that maybe folks would want to see again and then maybe ask some questions. But either way, I always make my slides available to folks. If you would like a copy at the very end of this presentation, you will see a questions slide. And when we get there, you can ask me questions, just type it in the chat box, or as we're going along, if you have questions, you can type that in the chat box and I'll get to it at the end. It'll also have a copy of my email address that you can email me questions. And if you would like a copy of the slides, you can email me there at that particular email address. I also have a couple of QR codes present there on that slide. One of them will take you to the Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel, and that is where all of the recordings of my past webinars go and are housed. So if you saw one or a part of one and you feel like you missed something, you can always go back there and get it. I've got everything up to date, including the last one, which was Native American medicinal plants. That is up and available now. This one will probably be up maybe tomorrow, more than likely, probably early next week. And lots of good stuff there. If you want to know what's coming up, you can either check out the main extension, main UGA extension calendar on, also you can check out if your local extension office in Georgia has the feed for the main calendar. It'll probably be on there. And also we'll have a link on the back page to the UGA extension Gwinnett calendar. And it should have a listing of everything coming up, all the new stuff for the next so many months through, I believe, November. Those should be going up soon. So this particular presentation evolved a tiny bit. So initially, if you signed up, it said the long history of the southern magnolia. We have the southern magnolia here, but we also have a lot of other magnolia species here in Georgia and the Southeast. And as I started doing more and more research, I'm like, I love the southern magnolia, and it's a pretty tree. It has a lot of history here, but there are other types of magnolias here that deserve to be talked about just as much as the southern magnolia. And a lot of them all around the world have a lot of unique properties, medicinal uses in the landscape, everything else. So I kind of expanded a little bit. I took out the southern on the history of the southern magnolia and I made it just the magnolia because it's a very interesting tree and there are a lot of different varieties. They're all very beautiful. I have a couple different varieties in my own yard here up in Rabun County. My mom has a property up there and it's got a couple of different species of magnolia up there. So yeah, lots of interesting stuff. So let's go ahead and dive in. And like I said, if you joined late, you can get a copy of the slide deck if you so choose. My email address will be at the very end of the presentation on the last slide, and you can email me there and I am happy to share and I will answer any questions that you have. All right. So I liked this particular saying. Sometimes my presentations are filled with tons and tons of information, and some of them are just kind of whimsical and interesting and the did you know kind of facts. And that's what this one is. So this one's going to be less technical. The Native American medicinal plants was very technical. It was very information heavy. This one is a little less so, but it's kind of interesting and filled with little factoids about magnolias. So we have a large southern magnolia outside my office. When I say large, I mean it's probably, I would say, close to 100 feet tall. Maybe not quite. Um, but it's pretty tall and it's blooming right now. So they've been blooming. I've got one in my backyard also, and they've been blooming now for several weeks to, give or take a month. And the creamy, beautiful blossoms have a really lovely scent. It's kind of like a citrusy, it kind of envelops you, and it just makes you think of lazy days sitting on the porch, maybe drinking a sweet tea or something like that. But I liked this particular saying, magnolia blossoms smell like the very essence of the South. And they do. They are a beautiful, lovely flower. Sometimes I get a little annoyed at the leaves when they drop their leaves because they're very leathery, and lawnmowers don't like them so much. But the flowers are gorgeous. So let's learn about the magnolia as a generality, okay? So most people don't realize, but magnolias have been around since the times of the dinosaurs. You can see here we have a magnolia seed pod, and you have a fossil of a magnolia seed pod, which is very interesting. So the magnolia existed somewhere between 36 and 58 million years ago during the Cretaceous period. That's a long time. Of course, they've evolved since then, but they are so old that they don't even use bees for pollination. They use beetles because that's what was around back then. They're very primitive. They have very primitive flowers and plants just in general. And they're one of the earliest flowering plants in the fossil record. So kind of cool, huh? They were originally found throughout the world, but they did go extinct in Europe during the last ice age. And so now they're found in Asia, the Himalayas, Central America, the West Indies, and then, of course, the southeastern United States. And they can be found all along the Gulf Coast, all the way from East Texas, all the way up through coastal Virginia. And there are quite a few species, and we'll talk about those. So magnolias were originally named by Linnaeus in 1759 in honor of the botanist Pierre Magnol. So trivia. And because they're so ancient, that kind of lends to their resilience. So, really, there are over 200 species of magnolias worldwide. There's only a handful that are botanically significant in that they have medicinal properties and that kind of thing. And there are 8 species native to the southeastern US. Some people might know that, some people might not. So, yeah, that's kind of interesting. And again, I like going down the rabbit hole, which is why sometimes I pick these because when I start doing the research, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that. So, cultural symbolism of the magnolia. So, because it's such an old and an ancient flower, there is a lot of symbolism here, and it's been used because, again, many species of magnolia all around the world. Um, Used an awful lot in China and Japan, but also in Europe before it went extinct over there. So in China, people believed that planting one ensures luck and prosperity and marital happiness. So, according to feng shui, if you put one in front of your house, it'll promote a happy, full life of pleasures and all the good things. So everybody rush out and get yourself a magnolia and plant that in your front yard. Now, we do actually recommend some of these plants to be planted in your front yard. Several of these, there's some dwarf varieties, some new cultivars that are actually fairly small and compact and are very well adapted to small suburban front yards. So you can, you know, check both of those boxes by choosing a nice magnolia that fits the size of your yard, and it ensures that you have good luck and good health. So in Europe during the Victorian era, um, if a man betrayed his partner or returned after leaving her for somebody else, he would give her magnolia flowers. And this indicated nobility to his intentions. In Japan, on their wedding day, brides would use bouquets of magnolia flowers to show their strength and purity of love. And the southern magnolia, of course, is very widely recognized for hospitality, endurance, and then, of course, southern heritage. I mean, it's just very well known across the Southeast. And it's been planted all along the coastal areas. It's become kind of a visual marker. So if you've, moved or you are up somewhere in the Midwest or the Northeast or even out Southwest or whatever, and you come down and you see a huge southern magnolia, a lot of times people are like, oh, wow, yeah, that's definitely something that belongs in the South. So there are lots of medicinal uses for the magnolia. There's a couple of different compounds in there, magnolol and onochical. Probably butchered that last one, but they're very well known anti-inflammatories, antimicrobial, antioxidant agents that have been used for over 2,500 years in both traditional Chinese and Japanese medicine. Remember, I said that magnolias are basically they're all different species all around the world, over 200 species. So that means that they have been used historically for a very, very long time. And that was the main reason why I removed the southern part of the southern magnolia and said, let's talk about all magnolias because yeah, the southern magnolia is great and all, but who knew that the just the magnolia in general, that there were so many of them, so many different species all around the world, and they had such deep traditional uses in different heritages around the world. So this kind of does tie in a little bit into the Native American medicine in that this was, very ancient medicine that was used many, 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 many years ago, and that it could be used for depression or gastrointestinal problems, respiratory issues, pain, stroke, menopausal symptoms, that kind of thing. So the Magnolia bondi from China is traditionally used and actually still used for sinus congestion, headaches, respiratory things. So basically a cold. And it does have, and I've tried to provide citations here for where I found that information for upper respiratory tract illnesses and things like that. So continuing on the medicinal uses, Magnolia officinalis and Magnolia biondi. Again, they've both been used for disorders. So, as I mentioned, all the other things, but also in Mexico and Central America, you have the Magnolia mexicana, and that was used to treat nervous system ailments, including anger. So, apparently, if you're very angry, maybe this will make you not be as angry or calm down, sadness and epileptic seizures, cardiac, circulatory things. And then you have I'm not even going to try to attempt that Latin name, the Magnolia Galaxy, flower buds. I did attempt it. Please excuse me if I've butchered it. Flower buds, and those were used to treat asthma. And we still, and you'll see that on the very last page, we still actually pickle magnolia blossoms, and some people will eat them. So maybe there continues to be something there to that. And then here we do another tie-in to Native Americans. And early colonial physicians used magnolia for sinus troubles, coughs, colds, rheumatism, arthritis, and digestive tracts, and even as an anti-malarial. Now, we basically have eradicated malaria here in the US, but please note that during colonial times, down in South Carolina and along the coast into Florida, malaria was very much a real thing. And so the first folks that came and colonized and lived here way, way, way back in the 1700s and 1800s. I'm not sure exactly when it was eradicated, but yeah, they had to deal with all of that. So it was definitely a thing, and they were always looking for trees and other plants to use for medicine. And anything, anything bark, flower buds, seed pods, and seeds, they were all used in some form or fashion. And you can see here in this particular wheel, they talk about all the different things that could be used. So the seed pods, the flower buds, the flowers, and the leaves, and the things that they were used for. So again, Native American and folk medicine, they use the Magnolia grandiflora, which is Southern Magnolia, for fever reduction, rheumatism, and coughs, respiratory complaints, and just general tonics. So this is very specific to the um, Southern Magnolia, but again, um, used around the world, very similar around the world, and we used it here also. So if you have ancestors that were here long ago and have lived here since some of the first Americans settled, your ancestors may have used magnolia for a variety of ailments. So now let's move on to ecological importance of magnolias. So all magnolias are not the same. Some of them are deciduous, meaning they drop their leaves, like you see the one there in the bottom left. That one actually is a deciduous. It will bud out and flower first, and then it will grow leaves, and then of course it loses its leaves in the fall. And some of them are evergreen, meaning they keep their leaves all year round. The southern magnolia is like that. It will keep its leaves all year round. It tends to shed its leaves in batches, and that's happening end of June through July. So when they bloom very shortly after, around that time, they drop their leaves and then they'll push new leaves out. So we always get calls from people going, "Why is my magnolia losing all its leaves?" Well, it's not going to lose all its leaves. It does drop those just as a matter of its life cycle in the summertime, and that is perfectly normal. So, with ecological importance, those fruits that you see, those little seed pods and the seeds, they're going to attract a lot of wildlife. The birds like those particular seeds. They have very deep roots. So if you go down along the Gulf Coast, which is where you see a lot of them, they have fairly deep and strong roots, and that helps them withstand those hurricane winds that you get as see you get the hurricanes that come through. And they have a very tough bark that provides fire resistance. They also provide a lot of very dense shade. These are really huge trees. And if you don't do much pruning on them, they will tend to have kind of this weird under canopy where nothing will grow. They have a little bit of allelopathy. So I don't have that word in here, but that basically means that they can exude some chemicals that can um, inhibit the growth of weeds and other plants and things like that underneath their canopy. It's very minor. It's not nearly as much. You probably know like the black walnut and some other trees of that nature that have more known allelopathy, but the magnolia does have a little bit of that. But it's a very dense shade, especially under the evergreen varieties like the southern magnolia. And their flowers support pollinators. So they're a great pollinating tree. And for those deciduous varieties that bloom first thing in the spring, they're very important for as it's a very important pollen source for very early pollinators that are coming out, waking up after winter. And it's very, again, like I said, very important. And for nesting and shelter for both animals and for birds, the evergreen varieties that have their leaves all year round do provide shelter for a lot of wildlife. So magnolia flowers, I don't have all the flowers here, but they can be, depending on the particular species, pink or white. They might be a little greenish. They might even be kind of a purple color, yellow, and even a near black color. So lots of really interesting colors of flowers. You probably didn't realize that, right? The ones that you're going to see most often here are going to be like that pink, they're going to be white, and then yellow. You might see some yellow ones, maybe some purpley ones. It's kind of with the purple pink color, but yeah, it can take upwards of 10 years for a young magnolia to bloom. And flowers are always going to bloom on the branch tips. Now, the deciduous varieties are probably going to bloom in March. Some of the evergreen varieties typically will bloom in the summer months. And some of those flowers are very fragrant. So the grandiflora, which is the southern magnolia, and the stellata, those blooms are very fragrant. In fact, I have a colleague that I work with at the office. I'll call out Jonathan, always picks the southern magnolia blooms on the tree in our parking lot that he can reach, and he'll bring them in and put them in water. And yeah, they smell they're very fragrant. I enjoy that. Flowers are monoecious, meaning that they have both male and female reproductive parts in the flower. And again, they use beetles because it's such an ancient tree. So they beetles are pollinators. Some people don't think of them like that. They're very bumbling pollinators, and some kind of wonder if they don't do that by accident. But nonetheless, they are the pollinators for these particular trees. So the flowers don't have nectar. The beetles are going to feed off the pollen and the flower petals, so they'll chew on the flower petals. If you wondered why, if you've ever picked a flower, if there's munches on there, that's why. And there are also winter moth larvae that can eat magnolia blossoms. We don't have that much here. That's going to be more in other parts of the world, but we do. And then, of course, you have the very cone-like um, fruits of the magnolia, the flowers, and those are going to have your seeds. And those will be kind of a red, which is what you see down at the bottom. That's going to be your southern magnolia, and you might have orange or pink seeds. And those, which we'll talk about later, are what the birds eat. And so the magnolia has evolved to kind of make those enticing. So sometimes they'll appear on little threads and kind of wave in the wind to catch the bird's attention. So the leaves. Of the 8 native species in the southeast, 6 of those are deciduous, meaning they drop their leaves every year. Now, what you see here, those are going to be evergreen, so they're going to keep their leaves all year round and then drop them in batches. But deciduous. So most people, when you think of a magnolia, you think of the evergreen variety, the Magnolia grandiflora. But no, they're actually mostly deciduous. They drop their leaves just like a lot of other hardwood trees do. And the leaves are very leathery green, kind of a fuzzy. The bottom underneath is kind of rusty colored, like you see there. The other evergreen variety is the sweet bay magnolia, Magnolia virginiana, and it's a host plant for the tiger swallowtail butterfly and the sweet bay silk moth. So some people aren't aware, or if you don't know what a host plant is, that's going to be the plant that a butterfly will lay its eggs on, and they're very host specific. So some butterflies may only have a handful of host plants, like monarchs, which of course like milkweed, and some have a wide variety of plants that they are perfectly happy to lay their eggs on. And actually, it tends to be a better adaptation, because sometimes if you're looking for instance, milkweed and you can't find any, then that's a problem. Whereas if you have 10 or 15 host plants, you're almost guaranteed that you're going to find whatever a plant that is sufficient for laying eggs on. So the magnolia leaves do have alkaloids and terpenoids, and those make that foliage toxic to most other insects that would be feeding on there, but it works for the larva of the swallowtail butterfly and the sweet bay moth. And so, hey, that's great. That means that they don't have as much competition for the food. So yeah, it's a good adaptation to have. Additional landscape uses of magnolias. So again, they can be used as specimen trees in large gardens and parks. So you have like the southern magnolia, they get huge. They can get up to 100+ feet. Some varieties, they have very pretty kind of almost vase or conical type structures. So you get the really pretty blossoms that show up first thing in the spring and then they leaf out. Some of them have pretty fall color, like you see there in the top left. That one is the Anise magnolia. Salicifolia in Japan has a very pretty yellow fall color. And then in southern landscapes here, again, they're native to the coastal plain, but have naturalized all along the southeast and all the way up to Delaware. It's used, and as I'd mentioned earlier, it's a kind of a traditional tree in southern landscapes. So I have several in my yard here. I've got one in the backyard. I've got a couple of deciduous ones in my front yard. They're very pretty and I enjoy them. A very good ornamental tree that just kind of screams the South. Early colonists and botanists, they collected these magnolia seeds and even introduced them back into Europe in the early 1700s, as which usually in the US they're collecting from somewhere else and bringing them here. And, a lot of what we have here now is from someplace else. But in this case, they collected seeds from the magnolia and took them elsewhere. So nice for that. But they have some of the historic specimens are upwards of 121 feet tall. That's pretty tall. And I don't have the spread on that particular tree, but you can imagine if it's 121 feet, it's going to be pretty wide as well, as you see like in this champion tree or specimen tree here. Yeah, so, specimens dating back to the 19th century, like in the colonial Williamsburg. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the different types of magnolias, the different species that we have here in the southeast. So this is just kind of a distribution map that shows all the different species of magnolias. And we'll differentiate that and talk a little bit about each of them. But you can see there's 6 of them here. There's actually more, but again, these are the 6. We have some that we've brought in from other places, but these are the endemic native magnolias that you'll find here. So you have the southern magnolia, of course, and that one has the biggest distribution throughout the southeast. You have the sweet bay magnolia, the Fraser magnolia, the big leaf magnolia, the umbrella magnolia, and the ash magnolia. And so this is distribution in Georgia. So you can see the Fraser magnolia. That's the one that my mom has up on her property in Sky Valley, which is in the very, very tippy northeast part of the state in the Blue Ridge area. And then we have the umbrella magnolia, Piedmont Mountains. You have the Southern Magnolia, which we do have that all up here. It's kind of mixed and matched in there. And the Ash Magnolia. That one's actually more in Florida in the Panhandle. So these are just rare occurrences that have been noted growing up into Georgia. But this would be the very far northern part of its range, very limited to the coastal plain. And then, of course, we have the southern magnolia. So you can see here, and there is some distribution into Louisiana, but it's not super fond of super swampy areas. And so it's not going to be one that you're going to find a lot there. But this is generally a pretty good representation of where the southern magnolia is. And as I mentioned, the southern magnolia was the one that was supposed to be, this entire presentation was supposed to be about. But as I was going through with that and doing that, I was like, yeah, I can't just do it straight on the southern magnolia. I need to talk about the other varieties here because they are just as important, maybe even more so for wildlife and those kinds of things. And so we were just going to talk about all of them. So the southern magnolia is also known as the Carolina laurel or the bulbe, a kind of, regional names, which is why we always try to encourage folks to talk in the Latin names or the botanical names, like the Magnolia grandiflora, because you could be calling it something and somebody's scratching their head going, what are they talking about? I don't know what that is. But if you say the botanical name, they'll know what that is. So it is found in forests, coastal plains, riverbanks, pretty much anywhere in the southeast. We have humid, warm conditions, which is pretty much everywhere down here. And again, those beautiful lemony scented flowers that are really big, like 10 to 12 inches across. You can hold it in your hands. They're very resistant to hurricanes and fires. We already talked about that. Very deep root system. And again, they can grow up to 120 feet. The champion trees, I mentioned that Mississippi, they have one in Mississippi, I believe, that is that tall, spread 30 to 50 feet, so fairly wide. They can live a long time, upwards of 120 years if there's no storm damage. Very slow growing. So it can take, I have one in my backyard that's now finally, oh goodness, maybe 30 feet tall, and it is 25 years old. So it's pretty old. It's taken a long time to get that big. Hardy in zone 6 through 10 and tolerates temperatures as low as 0 degrees. But buds and flowers are susceptible to frost. It would take a long time at being 0 degrees or less to kill a tree, but you can get some damage on it. Next up, we have the pyramid magnolia. And that's probably more localized and kind of rare. So this one's going to be more in Alabama, though it does come into the very far southwestern part of Georgia and into the panhandle of Florida and a little bit into Mississippi. So it also has kind of these creamy flowers, just like the southern magnolia does, but the petals are smaller. It prefers to be part shade and kind of an understory tree, and it's a lot smaller than its cousin, the grandiflora, the southern magnolia. It'll only grow 20 to 40 feet tall, so similar in size and shape to a dogwood tree. We have the sweet bay magnolia, or the Magnolia virginiana. It's our only other evergreen magnolia. And it also has a fairly wide distribution, very similar to the grandiflora or the southern magnolia. It's going to be about the cold hardiest you're going to get. It will go all the way up through Massachusetts and touching into Maine, believe it or not. It does prefer wet. It can tolerate even the boggy soils. It also is fairly small. It's not going to get more than probably 50 feet tall and is more kind of an understory type tree. It was brought over or reintroduced to Europe from the southeast in 1688, so a long time ago. So again, another plant that has been taken over and introduced back to Europe after they lost all those in the last ice age. And then the little bit of trivia. So the roots of this plant were actually used to bait beaver traps by pioneers. Who knew, right? Next, we have the big leaf magnolia or Magnolia macrophylla. And this one has kind of an interesting distribution, less so in the Piedmont and more up in the mountain areas. So it seems to prefer growing up in the mountains. This is the one that we have up in Rabun County, and it can take 12 to 15 years to bloom, so quite a while before it attains an age where it will bloom. And you can see you have huge leaves. I couldn't find a good picture of one I found one, but it was really busy where somebody had put their hand on the leaf so that you could see exactly how big those leaves are. They are huge, just as are the blooms. The blooms are up to a foot across. And but those leaves can grow upwards of 30 inches long and 12 inches wide, so almost 3 feet long. That's a really long leaf. And the tree itself is about 50 feet tall. So, kind of speaking of size of leaf versus plant, those are really big leaves for such a short tree. And it does prefer more temperate kind of climates. Uh, less so the humidity that you're going to find here and the poorer soils of the Piedmont. We have the cucumber magnolia. So remember I said the different colors of blossoms that you can get. This is one that has beautiful yellow blossoms. So the cucumber magnolia, it's native and it's got these very small yellow flowers. Um, It's a very nice landscape tree. So if you are looking for kind of a specimen tree and you're looking for something that blooms, this might be a good opportunity to put a cucumber magnolia in there. It'll grow 30 to 40 feet tall, so it's really not too terribly tall. It is cold hardy, and you will get some that will grow upwards into Canada. And there are actually some nice cultivars. You've got yellowbird, butterflies, and gold star. Those can be purchased for your landscape trees. But yeah, this is a native. Perhaps we call those nativars, which is they've improved on the native variety. Next, we have the umbrella magnolia or the Magnolia uh, tripetalia. And this one is native all the way from Massachusetts into Arkansas and the Appalachian Mountains to Blue Ridge Mountains. So it's got a fairly, it's kind of skipping the eastern seaboard, as you can see there, but it is in the Piedmont, so we do have those around here. There is one actually, I believe, out on the UGA campus, and its name comes from the fact that the leaves kind of grow out from the ends of the stems a little bit like an umbrella, as you can see there. And it is about 15 to 30 feet tall. So again, one that's not terribly large and would be appropriate for maybe your backyard area. Next, you have the ash magnolia or the Magnolia ashae. And this one is the one that we have very sporadic sightings of in South Georgia and South Alabama, mostly contained to the panhandle of Florida, although there are a sprinkling of sightings in South Georgia. So this one is going to be able to grow as far north as Pennsylvania, but native to Florida. So this is just basically where I'm showing in the distributions are going to be its native distribution. But some of these have spread other areas or been moved thanks to us humans. And it's going to have white creamy flowers, very similar to what you see on a southern magnolia, but it's going to smell like jasmine and citrus, that citrus, I mean, it's not a citrus, but again, the southern magnolia, it smells very similar to that. It's just kind of a creamy, very lovely fragrance. And this one surprisingly is also fairly short, 10 to 30 feet tall. So just kind of one that grows on the edge of the woodland area. And then we have the mountain magnolia. So Magnolia fraseri, and this is native to the southern Appalachian Mountains and the Atlantic and Gulf coastal plains. So this tree has really deciduous leaves. So remember I said, I think, what was it? Eight, six or eight, six, seven of the native trees are deciduous. They drop their leaves. There's only two that are evergreen. And this is again a deciduous tree. And it's going to have very pretty white flowers, not the huge petals like the southern magnolia has, but definitely very pretty. And one that's very gorgeous, and I think anybody would be happy to have in their backyard. Kind of a great understory edge tree. You can see those pretty blooms in the early spring, and then it'll look like most of the other trees that you have. So last up, we have of the different species, you have some dwarf magnolias. So these are going to be ones that humans have fiddled with, if you will, or cultivars. So one that we see most often around here and most available is going to be Little Gem. So this is a cultivar of the southern magnolia, and it has white flowers and it grows to just under 20 feet tall. So a lot of times when you see giveaways for trees through Georgia Forestry Commission, or Gwinnett County had one, this is a popular tree that is given away a lot. And that's because it has kind of a conical structure. It doesn't branch out a lot. It's fairly compact. It is considered a dwarf. Basically, it doesn't attain much more than probably about 20 feet, 15 to 20 feet, but it's slow growing and it stays in that compact size. So it's a perfect one for a very tiny yard. It's also good if you're looking for a specimen tree in an island or something else like that. You also have the K. Paris cultivar, the southern magnolia. It's about 20 feet tall, and that has some disease resistance. So if you've had bad luck in the past, you might want to try that one. Then you have the teddy bear. It's evergreen. It'll grow upwards of 16 to 20 feet tall and blooms summer and fall. So it's kind of a continuous bloomer, a little bit outside of what would the normal bloom period would be for a southern magnolia. And then you have the lily magnolia. So you have hybrids like the Anne and the Betty and the Jane, and those have white interior and purple exterior flowers. So this is going to be a deciduous bush. I have one of these. Actually, I think I have two. I have one in my front yard and I have one in my side yard. And they are very pretty bushes. They just like you see there in the bottom right. They have really pretty purple flowers. They bloom fairly early. So if we have a late freeze, they'll probably get nipped and you'll either lose all of your pretty flowers or the buds, and then it'll leaf out afterwards. And then it just looks like any other shrub at that time, but it's very pretty. All right, so care tips for growing. Most of these, now there are some that are understory or they prefer to be understory or edge plants. But for the southern magnolia, especially the and the Virginiana, those prefer full sun. More sun is going to encourage more flowering. So if you want a tree loaded with really pretty flowers, and you have either of those two varieties, more sun is actually going to encourage flowering. If you have any of the other varieties, then those actually prefer to be understory, and so not as much sun. Watering, all of them prefer water, 2 to 3 gallons of water per inch of trunk, or we call that the caliper. So deep watering, we have a lot of issues with drought. I just call it the yo-yo weather. Drought conditions, really dry, then wet, then dry, then wet. Then you get 6 inches of rain and then you don't get water for 2 weeks. Yeah. Welcome to Georgia. If you aren't sure if it's going to rain, wait 10 minutes. You might get an afternoon shower, thunderstorm. Who knows? But mostly once they're established, you don't have to do much with them, either the deciduous or the evergreen varieties. But do make sure that during dry spells that you do give them a little drink of water. You want to mulch around the root system. Try to rake out a lot of those leaves, especially on the evergreen varieties. They're very leathery. Lawnmowers don't like them. They're a little unsightly when they drop them. So you'll want to probably get those out from underneath and mulch it. You can opt to give a little bit of fertilizer, but you don't necessarily need it. Again, once they're established, they are happy. You don't have to do much. Um, Try to use smaller, like if you have a 5 gallon plant, that's kind of the max that you really want. They have very spreading root systems, and so you can do some root pruning if you're going to do a larger tree for your landscape, but really they're going to do best if you have a small tree and like a 5 gallon or even smaller than that. Just because the root system is so extensive, they're not going to do well once you get much bigger than a 5 gallon pot. And make sure, because of that huge root system, that especially if you're putting a southern magnolia in, that you want to put them far away from the house. Um, Roots don't necessarily grow into looking for water into your foundation, but they will abut your foundation as they're growing and grow along it, and they can actually push and cause damage that way, just like they do under sidewalks or driveways or whatever. So just make sure if you have a really large magnolia, like the southern magnolia, that you're planting it out far enough away from the house. I would say here it says 20 feet. I would even go further than that. I would say 30 or 40 feet from buildings and sidewalks and driveways so that it can have all the root spread that it needs and it can be a beautiful specimen tree for you. You can do some elevation type pruning underneath it so that you can get a lawnmower underneath, and it doesn't touch the ground, which a lot of the ones that have not had any intervention with early with crown raising prunings, but you can shape them definitely as they're growing. And same thing with the deciduous varieties, all the other ones I mentioned, you can definitely do some pruning when they're young to kind of shape them up and let them become the great specimen trees that they can. Propagating. So most people are probably just going to go purchase a potted magnolia, but let's say you're out in the woods and you see one and you're like, oh, I want that. Well, definitely try. If you have an interest in gardening, why not, right? So you can collect those mature seed cones in the fall and dry the seeds and just naturally separate it out. And then soak those seeds in warm water for a couple days to soften them. And a lot of gardeners are already going to know that you're just doing that to kind of soften the exterior of the seed so that it's easier for that embryo to push through that. Stratify those seeds in kind of a moist sand or peat moss and refrigerate them for about 3 to 6 months. Or you can just leave them outside in your garage or your back porch so that they get that cold weather that we have. And then you can try planting them from there and see what you get. And so maybe you'll get lucky and you'll get a bunch of pots like what you see below. You can also try cutting propagation. So you can take 6 to 8 inch long semi-hardwood cuttings in the summer, remove those lower leaves, and then use a rooting hormone. You can get that stuff pretty much anywhere these days. Um, don't contaminate the main portion of the rooting hormone. Tap a little bit onto a piece of aluminum foil or newspaper or magazine or whatever, and then dip into that, just in case you don't want to share fungal spores or something else that you might have. And then plant those cuttings in peat moss or perlite, or if you have any of those little discs, rehydrate those, and then you can plant them in there and keep them nice and moist. If you have a way to make it a mini greenhouse, and that can be either, I mean, I've had folks use the plastic sandwich shells. You can do that. You could put them in a 5 gallon bucket at the bottom of the 5 gallon bucket, and then you can put plastic wrap over the top and rubber band it. It makes a little greenhouse. And so that makes it easier to keep that soil moist. And then roots will develop in about 6 to 10 weeks, and then you can transplant them. All right, some common pests. We're wrapping it up. So it'll depend a little bit on whether you have the evergreen or you have the deciduous variety, but you can get magnolia scale. Yes, it is specific just to magnolias. And everybody's got to have a scale, right? I hate that stuff. Really hard to treat it to. You pretty much have to have a systemic insecticide. They'll infest the stems and the leaves and they can weaken the tree because they bite and they suck the sap out. And then, of course, you get sooty mold because the excretions have a lot of sugars in there because they're sucking on that sap. And then you get the secondary sooty mold infestation, which looks horrible, by the way. And yeah, that's usually how you realize you have scale. And you're like, what is that horrible, nasty looking white gray mold on my leaves and everything? And then you go look and you're like, oh, I have scale. Yay. Aphids, same problem here. They suck the sap from the very young foliage, and you can get curled and kind of distorted leaves. And then, of course, they also can have that honeydew, which causes the sooty mold. And you can get weevils, and they'll munch and chew on the leaves, and spider mites, and you can see those below. There's some other issues going on there, but they cause that stippling as they feed. Whiteflies, those are sap feeders as well. You can get the sooty mold from them because they also exude, since they're sap feeders, that honeydew. And then you've got the sooty mold build up there because it is so hot and humid. Mealybugs, same issue. You can get black twig borers, and that'll cause dieback. There are other, of course, other twig borers for different plants, but this is black twig borers, and then caterpillars. And then some diseases, you can get Cercoptera, Phyllosticata, and those are leaf spots, fungal and bacterial infestations. You can get these lesions. Sooty mold is actually what you see down there on the bottom. I should have probably put that picture on the other the other slide. Phytophthora root rot. So if you've got an area that's kind of a low spot and it's sitting in a lot of water, you can get the Phytophthora in just about any plant, and it's basically just root rot, right? So if it's poor drained soil, eventually you're probably going to get it set up. If the plant is not one that wants to be in wet soil, then that's a problem. You can get canker, which causes dieback. And, sometimes you can do some pruning and disinfect between those pruning cuts to help prevent spread further. Verticillium wilt, which is a sudden wilting and branch death. Sometimes that's not recoverable. And then anthracnose, that happens to a lot of different things. We had last year, we had a lot of problems with dogwoods. And dogwood and anthracnose will kill the dogwood. And then the powdery mildew, white coatings on the leaves, just like, as I mentioned before. And then crown gall, which you see a picture of that. You get these tumor-like growths. Sometimes furniture manufacturers really like that stuff because it gives you these really weird looking burls and on the trunk. And so people will pay a lot of money for that. It's very artistic. And then you have wetwood and bacterial slime flux. That's going to be bacterial fermentation. There are a lot of different species that have similar issues. White oaks have a lot of problems with wetwood slime flux. And that's when bacteria, there's usually an injury or something to the bark, and that bacteria can get in there and it gets into the phloem, and it can cause fermentation. And so you'll get this bubbling stuff that kind of bubbles out of that hole, and you can get insects that will land on it. It smells like a brewery or something. And rarely does it cause the death of the tree, but it's weird and it smells icky. And then you have bacterial leaf scorch, and that can impair water movement as well. So some little known facts about magnolias. So a lot of these I've already mentioned, but there's a few interesting ones also. I'll mention it again. So they're so ancient that they use beetles to pollinate instead of bees because bees weren't around yet. They had not evolved. And the fruity scent of the flowers is used to attract the beetles, not the bees, because again, the bees weren't there. The magnolias have these beautiful bright red seeds that once they are pushed out of the seed pod, will sit there and hang and they'll swing in the wind. And that's to bring in the birds. It catches their eyes, so they come in and feed off of them, and then they shed the seeds elsewhere and you get new magnolias. They are non-toxic to humans and pets, and they are moderately deer resistant. So if you live in an area, Peachtree Corners, I'm looking at you, that have a lot of deer, this might be something that you can plant in your landscape that's a little less palatable than a hosta. Magnolia fragrances are used in perfumes. So that's a scent that if you really like the scent of especially the grandiflora, if you like that, you can find that in a lot of scents. And then this one was kind of interesting. So the wood grain of the magnolia is very fine, and it is used to make furniture and musical instruments and coffins. Who knew that? That's why there's a coffin on there. I didn't realize that. Magnolias are the state tree in Mississippi and Louisiana. That you could kind of expect, I guess. And dwarf magnolias can successfully be grown in containers. We do see that. So if you get some of these really large concrete containers, you can put a little gem and some of those dwarf varieties in there. Just make sure that you're watering it, because obviously if it's raised above the ground and it's dependent on what you give it, you don't want to go through all that expense and then have them die. Magnolia is obviously a big feature in steel magnolias and Gone with the Wind. Those are probably the most well known. And as I mentioned very early on, the pickled magnolia blossoms are actually considered a delicacy. You can see some there. You can actually buy them online. You can have tea from magnolias as well. And then the flowers open in the morning and close in the evening. And that's triggered by cool air and darkness. There are some like 5 o'clocks and some other types of flowers that do that also. And the bottom petals tend to grow faster than the top ones, forcing the flower to shut. Kind of cool, huh? And that is basically it. So I have about 5 minutes. And so if anybody has any questions, oh, question. I don't know. It's not allowing me to. Okay, there we go. The Magnolia Beyonde, that's from China. So can it be found here in Georgia? It's not native. There are a lot of different trees that, have the old mix and match. Do I personally know if there are any in and around here in the Southeast? No. Um, are there? Maybe. There are a lot of plants that are brought over from that particular region of the world. Anything in zones 7 and 8, which is a lot of what's over in Asia, Japan, all the way through India, in Vietnam, and some of those other countries. A lot of those are brought over here as test crops, and then some of them get a little too invasive, so they don't end up in our botanical culture, if you will. But some of them are, and some of them do come over here. We're a little more careful now. We can thank kudzu from China or from Japan, I believe. Privet from China. There's a lot of Chinese invasives that are over here. You have English ivy, things that are in somewhat temperate, but maybe cooler climates or less humid. They come over here and they like it a lot, so they grow better and more vigorous, and they might have a slightly longer growing season. So, um, we have to be careful about introducing plants, but I don't know for certain if that particular um, plant is found here in Georgia. So I could probably do some quick research on it, but I don't know. Are there any other questions about magnolia trees? I want to get a magnolia tree for my yard. Never thought of doing that. Yes. Yeah, so there's a lot of the natives are perfectly situated for right along the edge of a wood line. So if you have trees in your backyard, you can add them back there where they get some shade, except for the grandiflora and the virginiana, which are evergreens. But yeah, even those, like I said, the little gem and some of the other dwarf varieties are really great for a front yard that just doesn't have a lot of space. So if you've recently moved into a subdivision and you have a tiny front yard, maybe your whole lot size is a 2/10 of an acre, quarter acre, that kind of thing. And they've put in like I don't know, they put white oaks and other trees in, and those are way too big for the size of the yard. Consider something like Little Gem, which is a very nice specimen tree, very pretty foliage. You'll get the same flowers, and they do really well here. And that is a perfect tree to put in the middle of a very small front yard. And then again, you can have the others as backyard trees. So, if you would like a copy of the slides just for your information, maybe you want to look into getting one of these trees, you can use my email address there, lisa.klein@gwinnettcounty.com, and just say you would like a copy of the Magnolia presentation. I am happy to share that. If you want to check out the other events and classes coming up, you can use the QR code there on the left. And if you want to check out recordings of other webinars that I've done, you can go to the Metro Master Gardener channel on YouTube and take a look there. And that's basically it. So thank you all for attending. I appreciate it. And take care, and we'll see you next time.